If you haven't looked at the description or the title of the video, which I would hope you've done if you've clicked this video, that would be kind of preferable. But if not, let me go ahead and let you guys know. Today we're going to be talking about world history, specifically how world history and by extension American history is taught to us in the public education system. And instead of trying to ramble on about that on my own, which I probably could if I really wanted to, but I don't, so instead I brought an actual expert on with me today, and that would be J.W. Novotny, or I'm just going to say Mr. Novotny because that's force of habit, because he used to be one of my high school teachers. How is it going today?
I'm great, man. How are you? Thank you so much for having me on. This is really cool.
Awesome. Well, we've got... My Stream Deck is not telling me how many people we have on right now. It's not giving me that information. I was going to look at that and just go, we've got this many people watching, but I actually don't have that information. It is eluding me. So I'm going to go find that information real quick. It shouldn't take me more than a handful of seconds, right? Assuming the computer doesn't blow up. So we got 79 viewers right now, which is pretty good for the very early part of the stream. Today, we are going to be trying to figure out how the education system is taught to people, because there are a lot of people who, even though they've been in the public education system, aren't really super self-aware of the methods that were used to teach them, and what some of the end results might have been from those methods, especially if maybe you only ever went to high school and you didn't go to college afterwards and get a different style of teaching going forward. Sometimes you don't really know. I mean, I didn't go to college, so I only have the information that was given to me by people who have. I wouldn't have known otherwise. So, I also see there are some people saying Mr. Novotny's the man. Hi, Mr. Novotny. Hopefully that's some people from the school. We shall see. I've seen some new faces in the chat, so could be the case. That said, let's go ahead and get into the first bits here. But before that, I want to ask, Mr. Novotny, do you want to introduce yourself, what you do? I mean, I know why I picked you, but I'm sure some people in the chat might want to know as well.
Yes, I'd be happy to. My name is J.W. Novotny. I see a lot of Mr. Novotnys. Feel free to just call me J.W. That's fine. I have been teaching for 20 years. I graduated with a double degree in education and history from the University of Nebraska in 2002. And so I've been, this is my 19th year teaching, actually, 19th year. And so love what I do. I've been teaching world history, American government, macroeconomics, and U.S. history on and off in some form for the last 19 years. 1 year in Nebraska, 18 years here in Pensacola. I kind of had the experience of a lot of kids, students, people do with their high school. Had a lot of coaches for history teachers, and being a coach is not a bad thing, but if you're not also a teacher and you're just there to coach, and teaching comes along with it, a lot of worksheets, a lot of videos, sadly, a lot of holes in my knowledge bucket when I got to college. And I remember just some really amazing teachers and some really amazing books that really woke my interest in history and filled a lot of, patchwork onto the things that were missing or might have been poorly explained to me, or not explained at all, really. What the hell happened in Africa between Egypt and the white man getting there would be a great example, that just wasn't explained. So, I've just been teaching government and world history and economics for about 20 years, and I love what I do. I love to try and teach this, I don't want to say like a woke level, that's not what it is at all, but not a whitewashed Eurocentric lens of history. I really want to make sure my kids leave with understanding Chinese history, African history, Latin American history, and that there was history there before white people got there.
Awesome. I do see that Keelan is mentioning that if anybody does throw donations during the stream, they're willing to throw art at them along with another user, Snow. If that's a thing you guys want to do, then do so. Also, I'm going to keep the same rules that I normally do during Hammered Out, and that is that if any artwork is submitted during the course of the stream, let me know in the chat, and it will actually go up onto the stream itself. So if that's a thing that you guys ended up wanting to do, then just know I'm going to keep Hammered Out rules for what we do. For Mr. Novotny, Hammered Out is the podcast that I run on Tuesdays and have been doing for about a year and a half or so, where we honestly cover a smorgasbord of topics, but it really depends on the guests we have on. That said, so you mentioned that you wanted to teach a version of history that isn't really that whitewashed. And the way that we do our history right now, especially our United States history, is it does end up being that. It does end up being fairly whitewashed. If anybody's had the... I know that the way that I've worded this before is kind of the more mythologized version of history that we're taught sometimes. They kind of don't know some of the nitty-gritty behind the United States. So can you give some examples of like how the United States history and even world history at that point that we're taught generally in public education, how that gets whitewashed? Because I know that there are some people in my audience who didn't grow up with the United States education system and actually don't know about how we're taught.
Okay. Did you throw the list of bibliography books in there that I sent you? Are they in the description? Okay, cool.
Yes, they're going to be right there in the description.
All right. A lot of the things that I'm going to mention, there are a lot of books on. If something strikes a person's interest and they don't want to just take my word, they can read and research on their own. Things that I see are the biggest, revisionist history things that we get, of course, is you can even just look at like Columbus. Everybody that like a couple of years ago, there was this whole issue about Columbus as a settler, not an immigrant, and whether or not we should be honoring Columbus's day. And we have this whole painted history that, the Native Americans were running around in loincloths without civility. And then the Europeans got here and civilized them and brought Catholicism. And that's just not true. I mean, here you go. When we talk then now about the Mayas and Aztecs, and they're like, oh yeah, they were amazing. And, the Aztecs isn't even what they would call themselves. They were the Mexica people. Mm-hmm. And we would say that, these people, all they did was sacrifice 30,000 people a year or a month or whatever. And, and the problem is that that's just not true. The Mayans had a zero concept independent of talking to Eastern Hemisphere. They were great astronomers. All of these guys built massive temples. They were able to harness the environment to their agricultural needs through terrace farming and the chinampas with the Mexica society. The Native Americans in North America, the Cahokia people had created these great mounds. The Mesa Verde out west were doing great things with their architecture and the cliff dwellings. The Iroquois people had their own constitution, So specifically Latin America, there's a lot of stuff that we ignore. And then going into American history with that, we ignore the donations, the contributions of minorities and women and basically anybody who wasn't a white European settler into our history. It's just horrible. Like, okay, here's a statistic, a true statistic. When it comes to history books written in U.S. history, only 4% of those books cover women in American history. And most of those versions are somewhat fictionalized. You got Molly Pitcher, but that's not her real name. She was, what was it? I can't even remember her name. That's so horrible with me. Or Rosie the Riveter even, who Rosie wasn't a real person. She was a dramatized entity over hundreds and thousands of women who went into the workforce to support America during that trying time in both the First and the Second World War. So yeah, we do that. In the same thing in world history, the greatest example, there was a young man shortly after you left my class, and I was always just teaching to the standards. This is what I was supposed to teach. And, he said, Mr. Novotny, what happened in Africa after the Egyptians? And we didn't have to teach anything. It wasn't there. And I was like, well, actually, there's a lot of cool stuff in Africa, right? And, let me tell you about Mansa Musa. He's the richest dude that ever freaking lived, right? And he lived in Mali, and he controlled the gold trade, and the salt trade was there. And that's how Islam got to Africa. And he ended up going on this epic pilgrimage and throwing out gold. And they're like, whoa, right? They didn't know that. But we didn't put it in the curriculum, so teachers didn't have to teach it. And you didn't get taught it when you were, when you had Coach What's-His-Bucket, who was, working on plays or whatnot instead of teaching. And again, we've lost a a great deal to impart knowledge. And the real issue is, the longer we keep doing this, we keep promoting living cycles of ignorance. We keep promoting ignorant people who prevent scholarship, who prevent science from being heard. I mean, why are we still not acknowledging climate change? I mean, that is beyond me. Like, the not trusting science is just beyond me. And I'll tell you why. I'm gonna answer my own question. Sorry. Yeah. we do it to sustain privilege. We are not willing to look at our mistakes from the past. We are not willing to give a voice to the forgotten and the silenced, because if we did that, we would not be able to sustain privilege.
I know that there's I've had some people who have trolled in my comment sections or trolled in the live chats before, who have made. Tell me if you've heard this one before, where you try to point out something as basic as, white and black people are the same. There's when you look at the differences between a white and a black person, you can find more differences genetically between a white person and another white person. 9 times out of 10. When you point out something like that, and then they try to hit you with, "Oh, so you're saying that all those uncivilized civilizations in Africa, they would have just developed technology on their own without the white man's help?" I can tell you exactly which YouTuber, which he's not a YouTuber anymore. He got banned off YouTube. Gee, wonder why. A lot of people who were from the Nicholas Fuentes crowd engaged in a lot of that rhetoric before, and some of my moderators can attest that they have banned people like that from my live chat before. So do you think maybe that those types of sentiments are almost a direct result of our education system just not going into the fact that, yeah, they had technology, they were building things like aqueducts, there were people who were building civilizations on lakes, which is incredibly hard to do. It wasn't just white men who gifted the power of Prometheus's flame unto them.
Well, a perfect example of that would be Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe was this city-state on the East African coast, and it was a Swahili trade state. I'm going to back up one other thing, okay? Another part of history that's just not mentioned and given any credit is the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Somebody probably told you about the Silk Road, and they said, yeah, Silk Road, Han, China, Rome, really great. Then it disappeared. Mongols opened it back up. Life is good again. But the Indian Ocean Trade Network was so much far superior to that. They were using large vessels. Once they'd been able to harness the monsoon winds, they created diasporic communities of multicultural entities. That's why we've got Arabs in the Swahili coast, and we've got South Asians in Malacca and Sriwijaya, and you've got this multiple ethnic group, these people. That's why you get Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam into Southeast Asia. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country because of the Indian Ocean Trade Network, when these merchants were trading there, and then they took roots there. And so there are all of these great blendings. So go back into what I was going to say about Great Zimbabwe, this great trade city that was there. When the white men show up, these giant enclosured brick territories, there's 3 main compounds, parts of the city, if you will. And when the white man shows up in the age of imperialism, they're like, well, wow, like these obviously must have been white people beat us here and built this. There's no way that these savage Africans could have done this. And it took hundreds of years into the late 1900s, 1800s, that there was actually cultural anthropologists who were like, no, this was an African civilization. This is what they did. And here's the pudding that we can prove it. And so we do that. We constantly are looking to, again, and we do it in America too. We create, like I said, there's these cycles that we want to keep our foot on the neck of people to sustain privilege. I mean, in the 20s, as the NAACP and W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington were growing American strength with our African-American communities, the KKK came about in its second great wave.
I think is that the great wave that started at Stone Mountain, or is that the third?
I can't remember that.
Because I'm like right an hour away from that.
I can't speak to that, and I don't want to falsify, an answer, so I won't speak to that. But I think that could have been actually prior to that. But I'm not gonna. Don't quote me.
Real Lock in the chat just let me know Stone Mountain was the third.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay.
But yeah, and we continue to do it. I mean, the civil rights movement. Why was it such a bad idea? And let's talk to some guys that inspired me as far as historiography, like a new lens in teaching history. Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States is revolutionary. Alfred Crosby's The Columbian Exchange, the cultural and environmental consequences of Columbus, was written in the early 70s. And that was, again, everybody was like, Columbus is a hero. President Harrison in 1892 created Columbus Day, and he thanked him for the divinity and wisdom and everything else. And then we fast forward into the 500th anniversary, and there's finally some pushback about, like, wait a minute, the guy also raped, pillaged, and stole. Like, let's evaluate before we give him sainthood.
There's not to interrupt, but there's.
No, go ahead.
I'm sure you're familiar with Prager University.
Okay.
They're not actually a university. They're a YouTube channel.
Okay.
And one of the big things that they do is they produce these 5-minute factoid type videos where they have a presenter hop on screen who ostensibly is supposed to be a expert in the field they're talking about. Though usually by expert they have like a senior fellow of an oil organization. And their funding was from the Koch brothers. Oh, sorry. One of them's gone. But anyway, ignoring all of that, every year they produce a Columbus Day video. Every year. I think the one from 2 years ago was hosted by Steven Crowder, if you're familiar with him. I don't remember who did the one this year, but every single year it's the same thing. They do a video and they argue, hey, everybody used to love Columbus, and he was a great guy. But then, suddenly, the liberals happened.
Right. That's our fault.
And that's how they articulate is they go, no, actually, he was great. I mean, he might not have been great when you look at him through a modern lens, but he was still really good. And they try to push that constantly, and it's an every year thing on the dot. There will be a PragerU video about Columbus Day, and it will always be the same video, just with a different person at the wheel and a different presentation style, but it's almost always the same. Where they go, no, look, it's this liberal PC woke education that's trying to argue that Columbus wasn't a great guy. He was. Look at all these accomplishments, and it's every single time. It's like, you'd think if you have to make the same video every year, maybe the point's not actually getting across to people.
Well, and I think maybe they're doing that for their echo chamber. The same people who become enthroned in their political dogma, that those other people still need to be hearing it to be kept captive, like Plato's Cave or something. If we just keep plugging them with this stuff, then. But yeah, I mean, I don't. That's just sad.
Yeah, I can. If you haven't seen them before, I can send you after the show a couple of their Columbus Day videos, and it's always the same thing where like they'll produce a video, and it's if you sit down and analyze it for a good hour or so, you can kind of pick apart most of what they're saying. But because it's usually done with cartoons, and it's usually done in this very quick 5-minute format that's super easily digestible, where they just throw a bunch of easy to remember facts at you. I get sent videos like that all the time from people going, look, you've been debunked. PragerU did this. And I've seen a couple of times, there have been a few teachers who've actually showed their videos in their class, not as a method of showing, hey, this is how you don't do research. This is how you present biased information. They show their videos in their class as supplementary education. And then people like me go, I feel like if a teacher's doing that, they probably shouldn't be teaching. Yeah. And then PragerU specifically hopped on to Twitter. Dennis Prager himself, the totally not rich multimillionaire, hops on there and starts going, Well, if we said one of, I think it was my friend Vosh who pointed this out, and they said if a teacher showed one of your videos in their class, shouldn't they lose their license too? And he's like, well, I'm a live streamer and I make hours of long content. I don't think they even have enough time to put one of my videos in class. Yours is actual propaganda. Like, these are not the same thing. Oh, and Real Luck said actually the Stone Mountain thing was the second founding in 1915 for the KKK. So actually, correction to a correction. So the second founding was in my backyard. Yay. 10 out of 10. My favorite. Though that does bring into the second kind of thing that I want to get into. And by the way, if anybody is in the live chat and has any questions, go ahead and shoot those out. I've gone ahead and let my moderators know that if we miss a question that comes out, go ahead and, or they've been instructed to let me know so that I can grab those just in case. But the second thing I wanted to get into is we've got a certain set of standards in our curriculum, and I was wondering if you could speak to how those standards are chosen and how that curriculum's generally built, and like what the methodology is behind that.
Absolutely, I can do that because I've been a part of it. And sadly, what you get to learn is picked by a bunch of middle-aged white men in state legislatures, and they can decide when they're passing the agenda what gets taken off, what gets taken on. They can decide that you have to have a state test and you're going to have to pass a civics EOC or a U.S. history EOC or whatever. And it's disgusting, really. It's absolutely disgusting because state legislatures are now taking off things like the Trail of Tears, and they're taking, I mean, stuff that people need to know about. They're taking away, I mean, here we are still trying to build walls, and, the Mexican Removal Act during the Depression, they deported 100,000 American citizens, but because they were Mexican, we didn't care and we got rid of them because of economic crisis in the United States, or the Tulsa race riots. I mean, there's just so many things that we're not going to discuss anymore because we'd have to, if not apologize, look at ourselves in the mirror for the sins of the past. And that's also, I'm getting a little off topic here, I'm sorry. That's another problem with the way that America looks at our history. We said, you know what? We get it. There was 400 years of slavery. That was really crappy. We're sorry about it, but you got Martin Luther King and everydeep better now. I mean, aren't you happy? And that's just not the way it's working out.
No,
I mean,
it's not.
There's still a system of deep-rooted de jure and de facto systemic racism in our country. And there's, anyway, so how this then gets built and how this continues to enable white people to have their blinders on so that they're thinking that, everything's jolly and women have every opportunity as a man, and blacks and Latinos are just grab yourselves up by your bootstraps because everything's okay now. What happens is the state legislatures, they take out anything that wasn't pretty. They take out all of our misdeeds, and the United States is not willing to be apologetic. Go read the German and some of the English history books. They're like, you know what? We effed that up. We're sorry. Okay. And even in like South Africa, man, under apartheid, they're not doing that. I mean, the greatest way you get control under those kind of regimes is you get the people to hate each other. I mean, apartheid, in South Africa, the whites turned the tribal people of Africa against themselves, and then they didn't have to worry too hard about subjugating themselves because they did it to themselves. And then they just put institutionalized law on top. And so what happens is white middle-aged men create our curriculum, and then it's sent to a few people or a few panels to be reviewed. And there, a couple of people complain about how they pronounce Yahweh, or there's too much inclusion of Islam. Just this year, I've had 2 complaints for teaching Islam in school. Now, Islam's a religion that 1 billion people around the world follow. And I had a father tell me that I was to teach religion in my class as if it were fiction. What the hell does that even mean? It's fiction. Like, I mean, I just didn't even understand. And then I had another parent call me, and that her time stationed abroad, telling me that Islam was a faithless and violent religion, and that she's seen it firsthand, and that I should not expect her child to turn in any homework based on that unit. And I said, that's fine. You don't have to turn in anything. You can take a 0, you know? But there's just a blindness to this, that we're indoctrinated into our, you know, these beliefs. And so then when what we're allowed to teach makes it to the counties, to the small school districts, we pull teachers in who are supposed to be knowledgeable, and we kind of create a key concept outline, and, you know, maybe strategies you should use while you're teaching this unit, et cetera, et cetera. And then we push it to the schools, and hopefully the teachers use it. But here's the problem, right? Even in our county here where I teach, we teach Islam as an introduction. So these are the tenets of the religion, 5 pillars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I go into the great science, you know, I go into the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. I go into, they created algebra and their astronomy, and you know, the distancy trades with the monsoon marketplaces of India and China with Zhang He, in this great diffusion of culture and technology. I don't have to, right? And then we don't talk about the golden age of China. We don't talk about how China developed the compass, China developed gunpowder, or any of that, okay? And, you know, I'm going to be a little facetious here, but it's kind of like we forget that China and Islam, or at least the Arab Islamic states, created the tools that allowed Europe to come out of the Dark Ages and the Renaissance. And instead, we don't want to look at that. We're not going to say that, okay? Instead, it's like all of a sudden Europe got gunpowder, and it's like my redneck cousins who found a bunch of fireworks and decided to blow off their faces. You know, it's like, we're going to make it better. It's just, it's weird. It's weird how we refuse to acknowledge parts. And so we don't, in the content, acknowledge other people's contributions to history. It seems to be here's another great way of looking at it. We see it as Western civilization. It's the Greeks and the Romans, and then when the white people dispersed to other parts of the world. And we don't give a voice to Africa prior to that, or Asia prior to that, or Latin America prior to that.
We do have a couple of questions from the live chat. One of them is from Lydia, and she asked, what percentage of it do you think is down to the textbook mafia? I mean, publishers. They basically have a monopoly on education in a lot of places.
Textbook publishers, they have a monopoly in that they get picked, but they write their textbooks to the standards. Like, I've been on textbook adoption committees and things before, and they, like, here in Florida, there's a Florida edition, because, you know, Florida is so special. We're like Texas Junior. We're going to do it our way. We're not going to adhere to No Child Left Behind. We're going to do, or Common Core. We're going to do Florida's version of Common Core. So textbook committees give us what we want so that we pick them, because it's a multi-million-dollar industry. And so, yeah, a lot of it is because it's lacking. I mean, it would be great to get a real book that's really culturally unifying. But the other thing is depending upon where you are, you got to be careful with that, because as soon as you do that, the moms and dads who are still suffering from the cycle of ignorance that I'm trying to beat out of their kids' head is going to be at my office or at the principal's office banging for my head, right? You know, on a stick.
I've had that happen. So, like, while I'm not a teacher, I do run a semi-educational channel where I do try to break down concepts and go, here's the science behind what we know behind insert sociological concept here. I have had that same thing where somebody has a dogma, and as soon as you kind of go against that dogma, they immediately get incredibly angry. I've had it from multiple sides. I've gotten death threats and emails. I've gotten comments from people saying, you're not Christian, you're going to burn in hell. I'm going to laugh when I see your body burning to ash multiple times. Those are fun. I like to call them Call for an Uprising fans, because usually they are. And then I've got people who are atheists who come into my my stuff as well. And as soon as I say that, you know, religion is not a horrible thing in and of itself, they'll go, no, religion is mental illness, and start freaking out. And I'm just like, dude, you realize that every criticism you might have of any religion right now, you're you're doing that too. You're sitting here with this dogma and attacking somebody because they're saying something that is outside of your personal Overton window. And that seems to be the same thing that happens there when you do something that's outside of a parent's personal Overton window, whether it be political or just their upbringing, and they don't even know like why they're there. They start freaking out. Like when you mention, you can't just you can't teach Christianity just as myth, as an example, because there's history behind it. There's an entire history of what they did under the Romans, and there's obviously the entire Jewish history that the Tanakh of the Old Testament was built from. And you can't do it with Islam either. If you just teach it as if it's myth, you're ignoring 700 years of history that came as a direct result of the culture that birthed that religion. It's kind of hard to teach one of those things without the other. Though we do have another question from Ratchet Freak, and it was, in your opinion, how toxic are teachers' unions with regards to education standards?
Oh.
That sounds like a...
I don't... okay, so... Okay, this is kind of getting out of our realm.
Yeah.
If you're asking me, I don't know if teachers' unions have that much impact on standards. They're mostly focusing on, at least in our state, they're mostly focusing on protecting our teachers. You know, like this whole COVID issue stuff.
Which is what a union's supposed to do.
Yeah, and they're trying to. But, you know, in 19-ish, almost now 2 decades of teaching, I've seen my benefits go down, my pay barely go up, and, you know, my planning period cut in half. And they're doing the best they can. But what I see our union as is I hate to say this, but it's a little bit impotent because we're not allowed to strike or anything like that. And I think if anything, they're trying to protect us. I mean, most unions and even ours here in Florida is it's fairly democratic, fairly liberal. But, you know, again, we have to do what we have to do that the state mandates. And to kind of tie back in what I was saying earlier about like No Child Left Behind and Common Core, that mentality also kills creativity. Because say I want to talk about the Mongols who aren't in our curriculum, even if I just want to talk about the brutality as conquerors, but their amazing ability to connect the Eastern Hemisphere as administrative, their political and religious tolerance during that time, and et cetera, I can't because, well, I could, it's not in the curriculum. That means I got to condense something else to make time. And say I'm a first year teacher who's not been tenured or doesn't have a good standing. If my kids aren't passing the EOC and getting a good enough grade to pass that U.S. history end of course exam, that reflects poorly on my evaluation and I can be let go. So I can't get into, you know, I mean, I love to talk about, you know what, we create a lot of our own problems. Let's talk about the CIA and the FBI killing Black Panthers and how the only time the NRA really has stopped gun proliferation is when Black people started buying them in the 60s, you know? I mean, that's a cultural, social, resounding thing that we should be talking about. But, you know, whoa, don't go there, right? You need to stick to, you know, this is this, Vietnamization, Nixon, Watergate, and move on to the 80s, and Reagan brought down the end of the Cold War. So it's, you know, even the testing can bind a teacher's hands in what they're able to teach. And okay, here's another thing. The United States is the city on the hill, right? And throughout our history, we've not been able to say we've done bad things. And again, I don't want to come across as this anti-American. I am a patriot. I love my country, but we've created a lot of the crap that we now have to deal with, you know. And the idea that we had to be the city on the hill, we ignored those Renaissance authors that I've mentioned, like Crosby and ZInn, who tried to bring an awakening to the gifts of other cultures to our society. And they're like, nope, you know, this is America and not the Childish Gambino. This is America. You know, well, actually it is. That's a great way of looking at it, you know. And instead we subvert civil rights. We ignored looking at those things because it took away from the image that we were trying to portray against the Russians and at any other time, you know? And then in the 2000s, it's the same thing. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but President Trump's Patriot education reforms is absolutely horrible. And he is now going after the same gentleman that I've mentioned. Now, Howard Zinn passed away 10 years ago, but he's got an educational foundation, and they are attacking the ZInn Foundation as being un-American. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure American is you know, freedom of press and freedom of speech. But anyway, such is life.
So we do have one more question before we get into the next topic itself. And this one's from Real Lock. Question for JW. I remember hearing that the size of places like California, Texas, and Louisiana mean that they often get the standards because textbooks are written for them. I feel like there's an inferred question there, but it wasn't worded as a question. Locke, I know where you live. I'm kidding.
So do the big states write curriculum? Yes and no. They definitely get a little bit more push just based on size. But like I think I mentioned earlier, Florida, when it comes to social studies, we have our own edition. Like the publishers, Pearson will tweak it to put in what Florida mandates that we need, or there will be a Texas edition. And yeah, they do that, and they can have a lot more influence. I've never really heard about Louisiana having a big influence, but Florida, California, New York. New York is pretty progressive. They've got their own, and I'm not going to try and say the name of it because I can't remember exactly, and I'll butcher it, and I don't want to do that. But they have their own rigor for civics, and it's pretty awesome because I've actually gone onto their website to steal stuff from my classroom. I'm like, ooh, yes, that would be good.
Like, this one's good. I'm going to take it.
Yeah. And this one.
Okay, so the next thing to get into, and by the way, before I say anything else, of the 152 people who are watching right now, if you haven't hit the like button and hit subscribe already, but you're still here, this would be my attempt at convincing you to do so, and I definitely totally didn't just hit a button on my stream deck that automatically asks you to. Totally did not do that. I'm totally not abusing this tool that has been gifted to me by my significant other. But that said, the next thing that I wanted to ask is, of the current teaching methods we have, because you've mentioned how they're very flawed, and you are trying in as much of a way as you can from your position to try to give a more holistic education instead of a very narrow-minded one. Of the current education system that we have, what advantages are there and what disadvantages are there to it? I know that you've kind of sporadically mentioned some of those as we've gone on. And for advantages, this doesn't necessarily mean this is a good thing. This can mean this is advantageous to like somebody politically if they wanted to keep somebody narrow-minded.
Right.
So, you know, if you want to speak on that.
Sure. Sadly, the disadvantages are pretty great. It does keep our scope real narrow. It keeps that cycle of narrowness, and I don't want to again keep saying ignorance, but definitely limited range of history. It continues that whole level of, I'm not going to let my kid read that mentality. It marginalizes the contributions of other people to our history. It kind of puts them on the outskirts. As far as actual people, I know too many great instructors. I know too many great people that have got out of teaching because they just continue to bind our hands. I mean, you know, our campus looks like a lockdown place. We've got fences and every door is locked digitally. We have to, we go through training for triage and putting on tourniquets and, line of sight for which corners are the best to hide behind. And on top of that, now I'm, the defungal police with having to sanitize my room every 90 minutes and everything else. But then when they're limiting the scope of what you can teach, and you got to do it this, and now you got to do this. They're driving people away from the profession. They are driving people out. And I hate that we don't get called professionals. I mean, some people love their teachers and other people think that we're just glorified babysitters. And that kills me because I really like what I do and I really put a lot of effort into it. So you're driving teachers away. You're continually seeing money poured into the research for this. Should we cover this? Should we cover that? And instead of giving tools to teachers. And also, you know, schools are at a disadvantage of this. I mean, the whole thing that we're talking about here, that we're not giving access or giving a voice to so many of these people, the ignoring of that continues to then say, we don't have to worry about funding these low income schools. They're going to be okay. They get federal money just as much as everybody else does. You know?
Except they don't, though, which is... So, like, when you look at the... I'm going to interject this one because I've spoken on this before on my channel. Low-income schools, it's a cycle. Low-income schools end up having worse education because there's less income coming in, there's less incentive to provide a good education, and even when you can, it's harder to operate in those classrooms and in those environments. And when those schools do poorly, they end up receiving less funds, and most of their funds come from local property taxes. So even when they do better, they can't improve anyway because the funding that they're coming from is their funding they're getting is geographical on a local level and not on a state level. And that causes those areas to be perpetually low income and the education to be perpetually like that. And it just so happens that there also happens to be a racial component to the people who live around those areas. So whenever somebody tries to argue that there is no systemic racism, there's no area there's no area where the system disenfranchises you, well, if you are not aware, in the United States public education system, you have districts that you have to go to for your school. If you're in a particular geographical location, there's a set of public schools you are allowed to go to, and those public schools directly receive funding from the local property taxes, which means that they're perpetually low income. It's almost impossible to make them not low income. And when we have people who are poorer, who also happen to be people of color, they get stuck in that cycle, and they're born into it.
Yes. And, you know, the thing is the only thing that breaks the cycle of poverty is education. And I don't care whatever answers you think you're going to throw at it until there's education for that. I don't see what's going to end that horrible cycle. And the thing is that there's absolutely been disenfranchisement. I mean, everything from, you know, when we think about what we've done with Jim Crow, and then even after that, after the civil rights, you know, movement, it was still, I mean, all deliberate speed, after 16 years, only 2% of Southern schools were desegregated. I mean, we drag our feet.
Because we got rid of de jure segregation and we're left with just de facto.
Right.
And that didn't change.
Well, and I don't even know if you'd say we got rid of it, but the really, you know, America believes in equality of opportunity, not in equality of outcome, you know, and in that there's some truth in that, but I mean, at the same time, you should really focus that we all do have the equality of opportunity then. And I don't think that's a fair statement to every American across the board.
So I do know that there's when it comes to the equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, there's almost a fallacy that gets stated there, and I know this is kind of off the cuff of what we're supposed to be going over, but I did want to speak to the people who have that kind of mentality of, well, you don't have equality of outcome, but you do have equal opportunity, so everybody should theoretically be able to get where they are going. The problem with equality of opportunity is that it's equality of opportunity insofar as if you were alone in the middle of a jungle with no tools available, you'd have equality of opportunity with everybody else there. But if you're starting out with no tools and somebody else is starting out on top of a tree that bears fruit, you have equality of opportunity. Both of you have the ability to succeed in this environment, but one of you started out in a much more functional area and with more access to food. The likelihood of their outcome being better is automatically better. When we argue for equality of opportunity, we don't argue for actually giving people equal opportunities. We just argue that by existing in the same society, they must have the same opportunity. But that's not generally how things work.
No, and you know the thing is that there's a great teacher training tool. I did this maybe 10 years ago, but it has resonated with me and I carry it with me everywhere. And you know, one of the things in it was it said is that sometimes a school is the best place a kid will go all day. And the other part of it that still I just grapple to my chest is that there's this thing called the 3 million word gap. And, you know, kind of equating back to your guy in the forest and the guy in the forest who had, you know, fruit providing tree. You got two children and they're born into families. And on one, you got a kid who's being read to by a mom who's there with him every day, and a dad who's got enough. And again, I'm not trying to gender type or anything, you know, dad's staying home, mom's providing, whatever. But you got a kid who has the secure foundation to make life happen for him. He's going to have the interaction, he's going to be talked to and spoken to and whatever. And then if you have a child and, you know, these are parental issues, if mom has to work 3 jobs and kids being thrown in front of the TV, or if there's a dysfunctional situation there, or if there's just not as many advantages because of gender, social, societal issues, whatever, by the time that kid gets to kindergarten, when A and B get to kindergarten, A will have a 3 million word gap ahead of the other guy. He will be spoken to, he will have been dialogued with, he will had the chance to talk back, and he will be developed 3 million words faster than this other guy. And that is a great you know, way of looking at it. And then the other thing, there's a great what's his name? I can't find him. Let me look at my notes real quick if I can't pull his name up. Phil Vischer. He's the guy who created VeggieTales, right? So I mean, you can't not talk about VeggieTales. And he has
the story with him is actually really sad if you look at how it ended.
Well, but what I was going to go with him is he talks about how, you know, his grandmother. He's got a great story. It's a podcast, a video on YouTube, Race in America, and he talked about how as a young man, his grandmother being able to just get a loan for a home and have a stable home to call his own, not a rental, but a home, that his mother could grow up with the safety of that nurtured environment that then allowed him to grow up as a third generation kid who could dream of doing something with caricatures and cartooning and design. And that was attainable as a you know, a minority or, you know, whatever, because opportunity was afforded him generationally. And again, that's not available to every socioeconomic diversified, culturally diversified area, or, you know, in America.
No, and that makes sense when you consider the fact that if somebody is 14 years old and the income in their family is significantly low, so they feel compelled to try to go out and run a lemonade stand or go out and try to earn money some way, legal or otherwise, in order to give their family some relief for their bills, that's time that they're not able to spend pursuing their dreams. That's right. Time they're not and I'm sure there's going to be at least some person in the chat who goes, well, they're learning economics. No, they're learning how to scrounge. They're learning how to scrounge. They can learn those economics in a class. They can learn those economics by going into the workforce after they've had a chance to educate themselves better. They're not just learning valuable life skills when they're going out and trying to make their house function. They're having time taken away from what could have been potential education time. I know that since I was able to leave the workforce proper, where I had a W-2 and all that other fun stuff, and moved to just being freelance by doing what I do on YouTube, I've had a lot more time to just sit down and research for videos, because I can, if I want to make a video and I don't know something about a topic, I can sit there for 4 or 5 days and just pile drive through a book and figure out what I'm going to be able to do. Before I left the workforce, I did not have a reading list because I didn't have time to complete a reading list. But now
Right.
I've got a pretty long reading list of things that I'm just... And it's a bunch of different authors, too. Stuff on economics, stuff on history, stuff from Noam Chomsky. I just recently finished Conquest of Bread, finally, because all the anarchists in my audience have been trying to push me to read it. But I didn't really have the ability to do that anywhere near as easily until I got those hours of my day available to me. And I'm an adult. Imagine being a kid, having school and also work, and then also trying to deal with all this stuff when you're still learning how to even do this to begin with.
Right.
So, the next thing that we want to get into, I believe that I think there was a question in the chat from Realock again, but I have missed it in the scrolling. So while he is restating that one, potentially, the next thing that we want to get into is, you mentioned not getting ahead of ourselves before when you brought up patriotic education, because now we're at the point where we kind of want to talk about what does patriotic education mean? What does that type of reform mean? What type of things do you think were being attempted to be accomplished by it, or at the very least stated to be accomplished by it? We don't even have to engage in a lot of speculation. Trump doesn't necessarily shut up, so you don't generally have to speculate on what he's saying. Most of the time, he'll fill in the gaps.
Right. To me, it seems like a power grab move to push a stricter white lens on American history, to pedestalize founding fathers and forget our sins. And I mean, let's talk about how we can just image this in the lens of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and civil liberty in this nation. It started with all men are created equal, right? And then not even a few years later did they say, no, not really. You're worth 3/5 of a man, right? And here we are with women. They don't get to vote until 100 years ago. I mean,
and then there are people who I've covered on my channel who actually think that's a good thing, and they're female.
Dude, I had a conversation recently about, with Vice President-elect Harris, and a woman said to me, I don't think women are qualified to lead the nation. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know what to say. I had to roll my eyes and walk away.
I've had that conversation a few times. The way that I typically try to handle that one is not by trying to prove that women can, but by trying to engage in the Socratic method, and trying to get them to explain to me why they believe they can't. And usually it boils down to some ethereal genetic difference between men and women, but they can't really pin down on. They'll just go, well, men and women are made differently. Or they'll argue from a religious framework, which they can do from a Christian framework and Islamic framework. It's generally harder to do it from a pagan framework. But I have heard it from a Christian and Islamic framework before, where they go, well, they're not meant to because that wasn't God's plan. And the last way that I've heard it, this one is kind of memey, but I have at least heard it once by somebody speaking not in jest, unless they were very, very convincing. And I guess that's just kind of how Poe's law works. But their thing was, do you want somebody who potentially could go on their period to have power over the nuclear launch codes?
I've heard something that ridiculous too. And
that one, I feel like that might have began as just somebody's ridiculous joke, but now there's people who take that one to heart and take it seriously. Those are the three reasons that I've seen: the ethereal genetic differences that they can't place their finger on, some religious argument against it, or they think that a period is going to cause the apocalypse.
So. And I don't get it, and I just don't get it, and I think that's the real issue. And I kind of was multi-eyeing, and there was a comment that, you know, the 3/5 was not an individual thing, and absolutely it was an individual thing. It was absolutely an individual thing. And here's what I mean by that: slaves weren't people. It was called chattel slavery. They were property. They were born into being property. When they had children, children could be ripped away and sold as independent property, not as their children. That's the kind of thing I'm talking in America that we need to really acknowledge. That even on our Constitution, we had I mean, civil liberties have come a long way. Yeah, 24th Amendment, poll tax, Smith versus Allwright takes away the all-white primary. So we've made strides, but we need to be at a place where we can't just say, you know what, it's all done and forgiven. We got to know that history, you know, and to marginalize it, to say that it wasn't about the individual, that's exactly what it was about. It was saying that, yeah, for representation, 5 is equal to 3. That, you know, that still kills me, you know. And here's something: in some of our United States constitutions, slavery is still in them. They haven't bothered to take that out yet, you know.
The 13th Amendment still actually allows for it. You have to be a prisoner first.
Yeah, and it I mean, we're seeing progress. I mean, the state of Mississippi, its people voted to take the Confederate flag off of the state flag. So there is progress. You know, there's progress, and I guess we're taking baby steps and not leaps. So
let's see. Give me 1 second. I'm sending something to one of my mods real quick. Okay. So in your opinion, where patriotic education comes in, its main purpose is to take an already whitewashed history and just go full throttle with it. Just pull the lever, Crunk. It's time to go.
There's a great book out there. It's called it's in the list. It's the history of xenophobia in the United States, and it really talks about that stuff. It's I mean, you know, eugenics against the mentally ill, and fear of Asians during the Manifest Destiny wagons west, once we got to the West Coast, and fear of Latinos with, you know, I mean, everything we're still arguing today with stealing jobs and this and that. And, you know, the stats that are put out there about, oh, these people who are applying for visas will never come back to their hearings and whatnot. 85% of immigrants who are applying for visas come back to their court date. All right?
The person who pushed that statistic was Trump himself during the, I think it was during the first debate against Biden when he right. said that, when he tried to say that most of them don't come, and the ones who do were, he used the phrase low IQ, which in my audience, I'm sure you're familiar with the book The Bell Curve.
Yeah.
So most people understand that when you're saying somebody's low IQ, you're not just saying they're not smart. You're also right. making a genetic argument against right. them, which is usually racially charged. That was the whole thesis of the bell curve, was that, well, I'm not a white supremacist, but white people are smarter than blacks because of IQ, and I'm not a white supremacist because Asians are smarter than me. And that was the conceit of the entire freaking book. And yeah, well, no, sorry.
No, you know, and the thing is that, so we had to have, you know, I pride myself on talks and discussions in my classrooms too. And, you know, talking about gay rights, and are we at a place where gay rights, do citizens who are homosexuals still have to fear from not having government protection? And, you know, I equated it to like how our society is going to continue to evolve. And I said, could you imagine that 60 years ago, the black kids in our class would have still had to worry about whether or not they were going to be in class, you know, and
or whether they drunk from the right water fountain that day.
Right, exactly. And you know, where do our moral objections? Is it a moral objection? Like, do you have a moral objection to having a black kid in your class? Or, you know, I can't help that. And, you the in the Colorado case where the cake company didn't want to make the cake for a gay couple. I mean, they argue it's their religious freedom not to do that, and I think I can't wrap my head around that. I mean, I understand maybe you're saying in homosexuality you have a moral objection to it, but I mean, what would Jesus or Buddha or whoever do? I think they make the guy the cake. I think they're like, you know what? We love all of our people. Like that's the first rule is, love each other. I think they make the cake, but
that's exactly what would have happened anyway, because Jesus in the Bible didn't hang around the. Granted, if we're to take Nietzsche seriously, there was only ever one Christian, and that was Jesus. But that's Nietzsche, and I'm not a fatalist. But if we take the stories of Jesus at face value, look at who he was hanging around. And I don't want to turn this into a religious discussion because that's not the purpose of it, but just look at the people Jesus was hanging around all the time. He was hanging around the Pharisees. He was hanging around the strippers. He was hanging around the thieves. He was hanging around everyday common people who were in various areas of society. He did not sit in the middle of an echo chamber and try to just stay around his kind, whatever that happened to be. So when somebody tries to say, well, I don't want those other different people, whatever definition they're using around me, that's almost exclusively who Jesus hung around. So, but what do I know? I have only covered religion on this channel for 2-3 years.
Yeah, no, it's touchy. And when we go back to this level of patriotic education, if that's what we're gonna call it, it feels like we're only glorifying the good and not analyzing. And I've seen it in the post. Somebody said Santayana's quote, those who do not remember the past are destined to repeat it and whatnot. And we really are. And I mean, we're doing it. We see xenophobia and scapegoating of citizens, and we see I don't know, just poor fellowship is what I'll call it.
There is we found the other question from Reallock. It was real stated, and I managed to copy it down. What does JW think about offering translated versions of standardized tests in multilingual communities? Because often what he's found is they often learn the material, but it's very hard for them to perform it in English.
I think absolutely you should have it in multilingual formats, and sorry, I just got tongue-tied. Our education system requires that. Like, you are required as an ESOL student. They used to call it English second languages or whatever, but they don't call it that anymore. You're required to have those opportunities. Every child of this country is supposed to have a free and equal access to fair education. And so, yeah, and the thing is we need to reallocate the money we do have that we are mismanaging into making sure kids have those opportunities. Yeah, I'm 1,000% behind secondary language opportunities for students. There's nothing in this country that says English is our primary language. I get that all the time. I love it when I see those signs that make me want to gag, that say, if you can read this, thank a teacher. If you can read it in English, thank a soldier. Because we don't have a first language in America or in the United States.
And it's almost, I do want to speak very briefly. There was a thing that was mentioned in the comment section of a video that went live earlier today, and I think it makes sense to apply it here. There's a word for that kind of mentality, and it's the American exceptionalist mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that is American must be good. And I think that mentality is good but misapplied. The mentality as it stands is America is exceptional, so worship America. That's kind of how it gets applied right now. I think the way that probably should be done in the future is there's an idea of American exceptionality we should be striving to, and accept the fact that we will always miss the mark, but we nonetheless should be trying to. If we're going to be the city on the hill, maybe we should try actually building the fucking city.
Yeah, no. And you know, the thing is we've been talking about this now for an hour plus, and so I'm getting into my despair element. Like I'm going through my 5 stages of grief because I feel like sometimes I'm like, damn it, just let's start again. We tend to give everybody a token, and forgive me for this, but um, you know, Latin history is one of my favorite eras. I
Mm.
love Latin American history, and we give the Mexicans Cesar Chavez. We're like, you got Cesar Chavez though, right? Aren't you feeling better? You know, and we give these limited tokens to people, and like, well, you got MLK, and you got this, and then we tend to forget all the other things. We're going to ignore, you know, again, what happened to the Black Panthers. You know, I mean, you know, Marvel changed the name of the Black Panther during the years of the active Black Panther movement. He became the Black Cheetah, right? You know, we're not going to associate it with that, right? I mean, so we do all these things that we, like I said, we give the tokens, but we don't embrace, you know what, I'm going to make it rhyme. We don't embrace the race. We don't embrace the culture. We, you know, and there's a great thing streaming on Netflix right now called Latin History for Morons by John Leguizamo. And of course, it's very liberal. It's he's biased, but you know what? Yeah, it's so phenomenal about really looking into the the misfortunes we have done to not really examined their histories, their contributions. Latinos fighting in the American Revolution, Latinos fighting in the Civil War. It's a great 90 minutes that you will be enlightened and laugh your tail off. It's quite wonderful, and it's just good. And then, you know, another one that's really great that's on there is of course 13th, which is a great analysis of, you know, 13th Amendment ending the slaves, but how, again, when we were talking earlier about the disenfranchisement and the systems that are not created equally in America, how African American men can tend to be placed right out of a track for the criminal system. In the 13th, that movie takes a great look into the disproportionate number of incarcerations in America.
We do have another question, and it's on the patriotic education topic that we are on. This one is from String Theories. A question for Mr. Novotny. Do you think that the patriotic American history issue could be addressed with a national scope and sequence? And if so, who should create this?
That would be awesome. I would like to see it. Um, we would have to. America is hurting right now, to say the least. We've got such a divide right now. I think that there would have to be a council, like a council for the social studies. We actually got one of those. It's called the National Council for the Social Studies. It would be nice to see them get together and build an arc for world history and for American history that encompasses our many fine contributions from our multi-ethnic melting pot citizens. Um, and then we'd have to make everybody buy in. We have to believe. We have to have some buy-in. And it sounds like I'm going to break into kumbaya here in a minute. But we'd have to have some kind of element that, like, listen, we're going to take a look at everybody's contributions and not, you know, redact parts of history. And the thing that a lot of people are still not willing to say is, I don't know. You know, I don't know that history yet. Tell me, enlighten me. You know, we're just, I already know it all. I read that, got the book, and or I watched it on Netflix. The other thing is that we have a, a divide in our scholarly, I don't know, our scholasticism, in our scholar-based mentality. We have a lot of books that are researched and well written and really well done. And then we get a lot of kind of, I don't want to call it like Barnes and Noble history, but it's like, let's call it light bathroom reading history.
I think I've got the comparison here. The
There
difference
you go.
between
There you go.
a book like this, which this is still a good book. I would recommend this for bathroom reading. That's not my American history book, a book that I read recently that is Again, still good, but I mean, if you look at the size of that thing, there's only so much information that can be printed in this, and it's printed in 12 and 14 point font. It's not printed like a Bible. You're not getting a bunch of super condensed stuff in here. You got 150 page of just facts versus this, which is my sociology textbook that I've used for research on the channel. There's a difference between these two kinds of materials.
Yeah, and you know, we've got to make it's foreign to us. We haven't. It's still foreign to get into a routine of teaching these things, you know. And you're just gonna have to understand people are gonna mispronounce names for a little while they're learning, but that's okay. We gotta make it a habit that we're gonna respect all cultures.
It actually reminds me as well. I was talking with a friend of mine who's a career economist, and he gets really frustrated dealing with like the very base level, like economics 101 that only deals with supply and demand and not much more. Right. And people thinking that they know everything about his field of study that he does for a living. And they come to him and try to, the word he used was undergrad-splain to him about his field of study. So I asked him to compile me basically the same thing I did when I was talking with you, because I'm going to bring him on for another show about economics at some point. So I had him just kind of compile a bit of a bibliography for me so I can have some reading, and also I can provide reading for people later. And it's amazing how often this happens in almost every field. You see it happen in science where people go, I had a coworker who did this back when I was working at Aldi. I know everything about evolution. I learned about it in class, and I know it's fake. And I just sat there and went, okay, do mutations happen in the body? Yes. Okay. Now, what happens when enough of those happen? Yeah. Would you say that if enough of those mutations happen, a being would be fundamentally changed? Because that's all evolution is.
Right.
That's functionally all it is. And you see it in science, you see it in history, you see it in economics, where everybody's got I learned about that in high school. You see it a lot with gender, where somebody goes, I learned about that in biology class. And as soon as they say that, you go, wait a minute, hold on. You didn't learn about gender in biology because that's a category error. You learned about sex.
Right.
And you learned about these categories. I can name the categories. You learned about phenotypical expression. You learned about gametal expression. You learned about chromosomes, but you didn't learn about Klinefelters. That's weird. And you kind of go through all that and just go, look, I understand you learned about this thing at a base level. This is what happens when you go to, say, college and learn about it. That gets expounded on. But people think that they're perfectly fine where they are in their education right now. But that generally isn't the case.
Well, and there needs to be a level of, you know, renaissance again of just trying to better yourself. And you know, like you, I have a stack of books in the living room that right now they're just coffee table decorations because it's running kids to soccer games in my life and running kids to dance classes. And it just really is a time where I'm not getting to read as much as I want. But yeah, there needs to be a level of betterment and not speaking, you know, where do you get your facts from? Facebook. Oh, okay. Well, then let's not talk. You know?
Yeah, let's if you can't at least say like Google Scholar.
Yeah. Right?
Just as a bare minimum. Because even Google Scholar, there's no guarantee that something you find on there is going to have the proper amount of citations and is going to be it's like grabbing an article from PubMed. It's a smorgasbord, but it's better than Facebook.
Yes.
So I guess that leads into the last thing. We're lamenting kind of not just the education system as it exists, but also a lot of people's ideas with education when they think I'm as smart as I need to be. I know about that, instead of just going, wait, no, I don't know. I have a bunch of assumptions about that. I know I was that way. I thought I knew everything I needed to know once I was out of high school and had a job and was making money on my own. It's just like, yeah, no, I know everything I need to know. And then suddenly I started meeting people who taught me that no, I don't. I'm actually quite the idiot, and the the longer I live, the more of an idiot I recognize that I am, because the longer you're around, the more stuff you realize you don't know. So that leads into the final point, which is what kind of things would you like to see? And this is not just what kind of reforms in the education system would you like to see, but what kind of changes would you like to see from people who are getting educated, in the ways that they approach their education?
Well, so a couple of things. The reforms in education, we asked about what I would like to see, some kind of a national council for the social studies revamping of it. And maybe leave the middle-aged white men out of it, right? Maybe we get a scholarly board, like, and I don't want it to be anybody who's getting paid, like College Board in the AP world, Now, Khan Academy, they've done some really great things. They're doing great. But there's also agencies that are really great. And I'm gonna name drop here for a minute. My friend Amy Parker, she's a fellow West Florida. She's no longer with West Florida where I'm at, but she was a former colleague, and absolutely love her. A breathtaking woman who is knowledgeable, and Madison Fellow, and knowledgeable, and really has a passion to impart knowledge and make the world a better place. And she is helping to create what's known as the Equal Justice Initiative. And she is out working with religious and corporate and educational leaders in our community and surrounding areas to bring awareness to the racial injustice and social inequalities in our territory, in our area, in the world, in our nation. And right now, she's already seen such amazing things and great results. And, she can just get in the door to talk to people about, okay, well, are you seeing this? Are you aware of this in your company? Are you aware of this in your system? Do you understand what some of these kids might be facing and why they're having trouble? Like, you're so worried that Johnny doesn't have a pencil in class today, but have you ever thought that Johnny doesn't have the lights on at home because he has to help dad work because they don't have enough money to pay the bills? There's just so much going on. There's just so much going on. Seeing things like, going up in Montgomery to the Freedom Riders Park, or the Peace and Justice Memorial, also the lynching memorial. There's so much now at our disposal. In Memphis, the Civil Rights Museum, the MLK Museum in Atlanta. There's so much that we can see, so much we can do to just help impart knowledge. And I mean, that's our armor. That's our armor to defend us against the xenophobia and the closed-mindedness, so that we can dialogue about this stuff and hopefully eliminate all this, the rubbish and the narrow-mindedness and the single myopic lenses that we have.
I think that would be... That's one of those things that I had to learn. I actually learned it in high school. I had a friend of mine back when I was in West Florida who was gay. And I grew up, the first school I went to was Pensacola Christian Academy. Young Earth creationist. I was taught literally that gay people are horrible. Like, don't associate with them. They're bad. And the reasons they gave me all stemmed from Leviticus and Romans. And I mean, now I understand what was wrong with the methodology there. But as a kid, I didn't. As a kid, I just accepted it. I mean, it was in my Bible, so I had to, regardless of what I would learn later on as an adult. And I had this idea in my head that every Growlithe is just going at it.
Let him do his thing, man.
I had this idea in my head that if somebody was my friend and gay, they must be attracted to me. And
oh, wow.
And because I was straight, I still am straight, I would go, no, I don't want them near me because I don't want anything to happen. Which, one, is an incredibly self-centered thing to think, but I'm not the only one who had that mentality. I've met people as an adult who still had that mentality where they'll say things like, well, I don't have a problem with gay people, I just don't want them to do X to me. And usually that conversation goes like, well, it's not like they want to do that to you either, trust me. But it was being around people who were different than me and having the chance to actually talk with them. that broke me out of that. It had, I mean, it was also the fact that one of my friends straight up called me out on it. Was like, Chris, you're being a homophobe. Stop it.
Right.
But it was being around gay people. It was being around black people. It was being around trans people. It was being around people of other religions that got me to the position that I'm in right now. Had I not had that exposure, had I not had that chance to be around those people, I would have still had those same xenophobic ideas, because to me, they were the other. I didn't want to learn about them because they were different. Why would I want to learn about them? They're different than me.
You know, and to piggyback that, you know, I grew up in Midwest Nebraska. My mom was a wonderful woman. There was no racist bones in her body. Um, Grandpa, you know, not so much. But my mom, I think, serving in the military, and what was imparted on us was that, you know, no, everybody's chill, everybody's great, we love on everybody. And when I went off to college and whatnot, I just thought everybody's chill, like, you know, that, you know, I'm not racist, so
Everybody
not
must be
racist.
like this now.
Yeah, and then when it hit me in the face that I was like, oh, well, damn, that, and so I realized that there are people out there who are really trying to hurt or make the lives of others difficult, or that just are consumed by hate, and that shaped a lot of my lens. You know, going to college was huge liberalizing effect, and then also the getting. You know, we keep talking about this education and books. I mean, some of the book that I put in the bibliography that was groundbreaking for me is, it's called The Crusades Through Arab Eyes. And we, again, here's our white Christian lens. We keep thinking that, oh, those crusaders went to the Middle East to save those poor people in Jerusalem from the heathen savage Muslims, and by God, it was our godly duty. And yeah, that's just not how it went down. And so that was a great book that really opened my eyes to the Western civ perspective versus world history perspective, and it was phenomenal. And from then on, it was great. You know, I approached history with wider eyes and a greater thirst for knowledge. So
A good, if I can name drop somebody real quick, a good YouTuber to check out, especially for kind of deconstructing some of those the lenses that we're kind of taught history standardly in the United States. A good YouTuber to look at for stuff like that, if you want stuff that's digestible, his name is Dan Arrows. And he actually did a video response to Steven Crowder about the Crusades specifically, and about how, no, these weren't just a bunch of savages, and this wasn't the Christians just defending themselves from the savage Arabs, which is how it's portrayed by a few people. He actually went in and broke down the history and went, no, this is what happened. This is what was culturally significant at the time. And I have forgotten most of the bulk of the video, so I'm probably going to go watch it once I'm done here to refresh, because my memory is absolutely garbage. Unfortunately for me, when I was 18 years old, I had my head slam into the concrete from a bicycle accident when I hit a car, and it's not been great ever since, but that's fine. That's why I generally have notes and reference materials around me at all times, because my memory's garbage. So we did have another question from the chat, and it's from Locke again, and he specifically says he hates that he's the main guy asking questions right now. But he said, what would Mr. Novotny's response be to, why do I need to know this? This won't help me get a job in the real world.
that's a great
That
question.
response.
I love that guy. I love it when I get asked that. And I'm going to tell you why. It's going to make you a better person. And it's going to make all your conversations better. Whether you're on YouTube in a chat room talking about it, or whether or not you're at a bar, or if you're trying to get a job interview, or wherever, it's going to make you a better person and well-rounded. But on top of that, the deeper answer that I give is that history and art and the humanities are the highest level of knowledge and self-awareness, self-actualization. My father taught me how to plumb and wire so that I could maintain my home. And then my mother taught me, you know, to do my taxes so that I could be financially sound. And then I was instructed that an education is the most important thing. And, James Madison, I believe, paraphrased something like this about, I studied politics and economics so that my son could study law and whatever, so that my grandson could study art and poetry. It is the finest culmination of what we're allowed to do, to preserve knowledge and interpret what happened, and then the deeper study of not just, well, this is what the Romans did, but this is what they danced to, and this is what they drew, and this is what they sculpted, and again, parts of that, like, I mean, this is where I'm going to go full on nerd, and we get into like things like the Renaissance and all of that rebirth of classical culture. But would we have really experienced it? Would you and I, real Locke, would we have really got to experience it? Would we have had the money to get an artist to paint our likeness? Would we have had success? Would we, and odds are probably not. It would have passed us over. But that's the part that's cool, the deepness of it. That's why you do it, because you're better for it in the end.
I'd say for me personally, learning random stuff that didn't necessarily directly apply to my life, but became just part of a knowledge base that I got to use later on, directly led to me being able to build this channel and being able to make comments. Like, for instance, there was a video I did. A person was bashing Into the Spider-Verse as a film, saying it was a horrible film for X, Y, and Z reason. And it was the first time I got to just nerd out about animation, because I knew about, and I'm not able to animate. I don't have the skills to it, but I understand the theory, and the theory is fascinating to me. The creation of in-between frames, the logic of when you use a smear, animating on 2s versus animating on 3s versus when you use 60 frames, when you use 15 frames. And I got to just gush. Like, for my job, I got to just gush about this little niche thing. And it is now my job. It would never, if you told me 10 years ago I'd be able to gush about that stuff as my job, I would have said, yeah, bullcrap. I'm going to continue working retail. Please leave me alone. You never know where you're going to be later in life where this stuff gets to be applied. And the more stuff you know, she is just going nuts. The more stuff you know, the more conversations you can have, the more broad your horizons, the more people you can talk to. For instance, if you look at if somebody's watching my channel for the first time and they see the stuff around me, they're going to go, oh, Suris likes Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, Star Wars. I've got my trilogy set right there in its box still. They're going to go, hey, you like those things. Suddenly there's a conversation we can have. And suddenly whatever information, however vapid it may be that you know about those fictional topics, is now suddenly a bridge that me and you can use to communicate through that we wouldn't have otherwise had. Knowledge is never not useful.
And my mom always would, she used to tease about the level of comic books I delved into, but that's just art imitating life, Yeah. I mean, it's always fun.
Eliakai did point out, I'm a shining example of that. You're the reason I became a YouTuber. I never thought anyone would care about Hellenism and the random conversations we've had, which is true. I know that there are people in the chat who started channels because of how I ran my channel. And then there's something from Fran Wilson. Fran Wilson asks, how do you think critical thinking should be taught? I think both of us could answer this one, but I'll let you go first so you have the spotlight for this one.
Critical thinking needs to be taught with open-ended questions. There needs to be less focus on dates and true false, and more questions on the process of history and sociology. The other thing is we need to not give parameters. We need to be able to still have open-ended questions. We need to be able to have paper writing. We need to not create quiz of dates, but one about thinking skills, comparing and contrasting, continuity and change. I'm actually kind of stealing stuff from some of my curriculum ideas. Analysis, causation. First this, then this, and finally that. And if we looked at history more like that, I think we would create a better idea of critical thinkers. And I'd like to, can we mute some of the despots? That would be nice. The the level of people who are just shouting ignorances and the people who follow them. Read a few things on your own, like, and if nothing else, why, going back to our previous question, why do I need to read this? So you don't follow blindly like sheep behind an idiot, and whatever idiot, Republican, Democrat, job, anybody, don't follow idiots.
I know. So I said I wanted to speak on it as well. The way that, for me, the thing that first introduced me to critical thinking was being forced to use it in a way that I didn't think I would. I've spouted my issues with one of my old teachers before, my old AOIT teacher. The way that we were taught one of our first lessons, we were taught how to write an algorithm. And when you write an algorithm for a program, you have to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and you can't skip steps, you can't infer, you have to go down every single point in the logical process, else the program, because the program can't assume what you mean, can't execute what you're building. That was the first thing that taught me what logic was, because later on, when I developed a love for philosophy, it was the same damn thing. Right. It was identical. I think there needs to be a way, whatever your passion is, to insert critical thinking into it. As much as people hate them, word problems in mathematics are a good example of this, where you have to take a scenario, instead of just numbers on a paper, you take a scenario and actually work out the scenario. More of that is what I would like to see. And the other thing I would say just in general is I think that a philosophy class would be incredibly helpful.
Well, in a stream of questioning, no, Socratic, following up, just keep going, But anyway, sorry.
Well, most people don't even know what the Socratic method is. That's the thing. It's the reason why I would like there to be just a standard, hey, if you're going to go through the education system, you are at least taught a philosophy class, and not just, hey, let's go through the Republic and then talk about that one book and then that's the class. I would like it to be, hey, let's talk about formal logic real quick. Let's talk about informal logic. Let's talk about fallacies, because once you start learning what those things are, you learn to identify them later. When somebody says, with the election going on, I don't want to talk about politics specifically, but when somebody says, hey, there is a spike in the data for ballots coming in, therefore the election was rigged, and you have to kind of sit down and explain like what post hoc ergo propter hoc means. And you just have to kind of go, well, just because this happened after a point does not necessarily mean that it directly follows from that.
Right.
And I feel like we wouldn't have to explain these very basic concepts if those basic concepts were taught and people knew what they were. And I guess the last major question to end on, unless another one pops up, is from Robert Millet. For both of you, what's your estimation on Plutarch's lives?
Go ahead.
So I actually don't know what the question is in reference to. So I couldn't.
Good, me neither.
So you were hoping to piggyback off of mine.
I assume it was. I know Plutarch, but I've not read him, so I can't speak to it. I'm sorry. I was hoping you'd give me a bone, but nope, I can't.
Unfortunately, that one eludes me. It is either something I have heard and it has been filtered out because, again, the memory is terrible, or it's just something that I haven't been introduced to yet. But now I know something that I'm reading. Plutarch wrote multiple biographies. Again, I still don't have enough information to actually answer that question, unfortunately. So I am sorry about that. There's one person that said that they learned the Socratic method from watching my channel. Well, I would hope so. I would hope that thing I use a bunch, it eventually passes, at least through osmosis. Dang. So we are sitting at a little over an hour and a half. We've taken up quite a bit of Mr. Novotny's time. I do want to thank everybody for the questions that have been thrown in the chat. If you guys have any final words to throw at him, go ahead and do so now. but I want to give the last part of the show directly to Mr. Novotny. If there's anything you'd like to end on, anything, and it can be related to the show, it can be completely random, whatever final thoughts you wanna throw at people as they're throwing theirs out.
Sure. Let's talk about Star Wars. No, I'm just kidding.
Which part? That's a
right.
rabbit hole.
I'd like to thank Jon Favreau for the resurrection of my boyhood fandom with The Mandalorian. No, I think that what we need is just a little bit of civility and love in our history. And one of the best books that I haven't touted yet, and if you're looking for a book to love, a book to make you laugh, and a book to enlighten, you need to pick up Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. And Trevor Noah, of course, Daily Show host, was born in a unwed marriage, in South Africa. And it is it's still up there right now. It's probably my favorite thing. I've reread it every year for the last 4 years as I've made my world history kids read it when we get to imperialism. And it is just a great reflection on how we allow our governments to divide us, how we, as a society, fail to look out for other cultures and protect our unity. It's a great example of how a person can rise from poverty. It reflects on family values of dysfunctionality. It is, it's kind of a rise of, I don't want to say an American dream, but like just living the dream. I mean, and he's so brilliant. He's such a wonderful writer. And from what I've understood, they're potentially going to be making it into a movie. But that would be a really great start into many of the things that I've tried to allude today about how history focuses a real narrow lens for so many cultures, and how there's just so much out there that we don't know, so much to contribute. And also that book is absolutely hilarious. So if you're not a great history reader, you're going to be still entertained, and you're not going to put it down. It's absolutely breathtaking. And I pray peace for this nation, that education really will kind of be a guiding force to help heal some of the wounds that have continued to grow.
Okay, the last thing that I want to do real quick is thank anybody who has thrown super chats at. I've tried not to respond directly to super chats here so as to keep the conversation as focused as a stream of thought kind of series of topics like this can be. So I do want to thank Sysenker real quick. He donated $2. Thoughts on Navpo Voltnerco. Again, outside of my wheelhouse. I cannot answer that. Chris H. threw $5, said, have $5, hope you're doing well. Unfortunately, I can't stay long. That's fair. And then Jen P. at the very last bit donated $10 real quick to the channel. Thank you both for your important work. I don't want to say you're welcome because that sounds kind of conceited of me, but I do want to say thank you for the donation and thank you for the respect. It's very humbling. All right, and with that said, I do want to thank all of you guys for coming out today. We were able to stay well above 100 viewers for the entirety of the stream, and considering that I had so many streams break earlier today, that's honestly kind of impressive. So I do want to thank Mr. Novotny one last time for coming out. This is
Chris, this has
been
an absolute pleasure, man. I've really, really enjoyed this, and I'm terribly proud of you, man. This is so awesome to see you doing your thing and doing it well. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. That means a lot coming from you. If everybody is here, please remember to like the video, share it out if you want to. And with that, we are going to transition to the end screen. Thank you all for coming out, everyone.